Today's subject on this day of 25th of December, which is celebrated as Christmas Day internationally by the Christian community and other communities, and it happens to also be the birthday of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan also. The subject of celebrating Christmas as a religious holiday as well as a secular holiday, and commemorating Christmas and giving greetings of Merry Christmas. This subject comes about amongst Muslims and is debated amongst Muslims. Before going on to this, what I wanted to demonstrate before going into the core of the subject, especially for our non-Muslim listeners, is that a comparison of Sharia law, Islamic law, and Islamic governance with secular law, if we compare the two, we will know that in Islamic law and Sharia law, which governs any country or which has governed any country, theoretically at least, depending on the ruler, is more suitable for religious minorities than secular law itself. Modern France, if we do a cross comparison of modern France and how Islamic law governs a country and religious minorities, you will notice the reason why I give the example of modern France is because modern France is a secular government, meaning Britain is also secular, but not the way France is secular, because Britain, the monarchy is Christian. The Queen preserves the Christian faith. She's head of the church. None of this exists in France. France is totally secular. Religious symbolism is outlawed in certain places, like the crucifix is outlawed. Jewish religious emblems are outlawed in certain places, as well as the hijab. So a cross comparison between secular law and Islamic law, that if Muslims govern a country, and we have case examples, precedents in the history of Islam, where Muslims governed Syro-Palestine, which is Greater Syria, and Egypt, which comprised of a majority Christian population, Coptic Christian population. For over 400 to 500 years, the majority of the people remained Christian because the governance of the Muslims benefited them. By staying Christian, they benefited more. They benefited more than the Muslims themselves. Why was this? Because Islam, the governance of Islam, very rarely interferes in any community that is governed by the Caliph. The Muslims allow those religious minorities to govern themselves according to their own religious laws and very rarely interferes in any law. So there are only a few universal laws in which Islam interferes, like the prohibition of murder. But the Christians, for instance, were free to trade in pork, to trade in alcohol, to gamble amongst themselves. Many things which are deemed as vices in Islam were not outlawed for religious minorities or those who were non-Muslims in Muslim countries in Islamic history. Of course, this does not mean it was a utopia. The caliphate is never a utopia, because as Muslims we believe the world is imperfect, leaders are imperfect, governments are imperfect, and the application of the law, there may be shortcomings of the government and the Muslim peoples themselves, that they will fall short of the correct justice at certain times. So, for instance, Christians are permitted to ring their church bells in a Muslim governed, a Muslim country. I mean, what I mean by Muslim country is a caliphate, a country governed by Sharia law. They are permitted to ring their bells. This is permitted. Unlike, for instance, in secular Europe today, Muslims are not permitted to give the adhan, the call to prayer, out aloud. This is outlawed. Even in the UK, for the majority of the time, we are not permitted to give the adhan out aloud. There are certain prohibitions. Now, what certain people sometimes they bring up is it why are there prohibitions on religious minorities or religious groups to build temples and churches in Muslim countries? This again, if you check a standard Hanafi text like Multaqa al-Abhur, you'll find by Ibrahim bin Muhammad al-Halabi rahimahullah, you'll find in this text he mentions that religious groups are permitted to build their religious buildings, but he mentions a category of land which is mentioned as as-Sawad. As-Sawad is a reference to the green pastures of Iraq. So he was writing the judgment for Iraq. Around Kufa and these cities, there are green pastures which were known as as-Sawad, and he states they are permitted to build their churches and synagogues and other temples and whatnot. Why does he mention this? Because the law relating to buildings, religious buildings, is not that Christians and Jews and other religious minorities are not permitted to build their religious buildings. There are certain regulations. So like in the UK, we have regulations that if someone applies for a masjid to be built, the council can reject the application. There are certain regulations in Islamic law. Those regulations are what? That the area in which the church is built is a majority Christian area. The example given by him of As-Sawad was a historical Christian area. That land, historically, the people who resided in that land were Christians, so the Muslims permitted for them to build churches. So this misnomer and misunderstanding that Muslims, according to this narrative that Islamic law persecutes minorities, this is totally untrue. Even the jizya, the verse in the Quran which mentions وَهُمُ الصَّاغِرُونَ, that when they give the jizya, they are belittled. Some of the non-Muslims cite this to say, look, the minorities are belittled when they give the jizya. The correct understanding of that is that those who were warmongers, those who waged war, and the state defeats them, and they accept a treaty and they give the jizya, the Quran describes them as defeated. When they are defeated, they give the jizya. But generally speaking, the unbelievers of a Muslim society are not disgraced. The jizya is taken from them, and the jizya is less than the zakat which the Muslims give as a tax. So the Muslim population give the tax of the zakat and other types of taxes like sadaqatul fitr. The amount that the non-Muslims give is less than what the Muslims give. And if they refuse to name, or they object to naming the tax as jizya, the Muslims can even change the name of the jizya. This happened in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu, when the people of Bahrain complained regarding the title jizya, so he changed the name. So if their churches, they can build their churches and synagogues and temples in with the regulations set out by the state, which is majority Christian areas, and other regulations which are mentioned in the works of fiqh, jurisprudence. They pay a tax less than the Muslims. They can govern themselves with their own laws, with the majority of their laws. So unlike Britain, for instance, in Britain, marriage laws apply equally to all citizens. So whether someone is a Muslim or a Christian or any other faith or no faith at all, they must follow one system of marriage law. This is not the case in the Caliphate. Each community has its own set of laws when it comes to personal laws, inheritance, as well as other laws which they can govern themselves. This is why Muslim governance never affected tribes. If Muslims governed certain tribes, the tribes will pay their jizya if they are even charged a jizya, and they will be protected by the state, and they are left to govern themselves for the majority of the things. The exception being universal laws. A fourth point to mention is that it is impermissible in a Muslim country, Muslim majority country governed by Sharia law, for Muslims to proselytize to Christian, Jewish, Hindu, minority religious faiths to their children. The state can, and the clerics cannot proselytize to their children. This is impermissible. In fact, the non-Muslim children are not permitted to even learn the Quran. They are not permitted to learn the Quran. They study their own religious texts. This is unlike secular countries. So there are so many considerations to be given with regard to governance of non-Muslims by Sharia law, at least theoretically. This, of course, takes a wise ruler to apply all these various types of laws. Now, when it comes to celebrations, the non-Muslims are free to celebrate their own religious celebrations. Of course, will always be regulations. Like in the UK, if someone decides to take out a religious march, a procession, they need council permission. They need a permission to parade through the streets because they will affect traffic. Likewise, in a Muslim country, if Christians or anyone else wanted to celebrate and commemorate any religious festival, there are regulations, but they are permitted to celebrate. So this is not an issue at all for religious minorities and all their rights which are given to them. And of course, this is a subject for another time when we discuss Sharia law and the amount of freedom that non-Muslims have. Some people mention, for instance, why were the non-Muslims made to wear zunnar? Some of the rulers would make them wear outfits which would show that they are Christian. This was for their own benefit because certain laws did not apply to them. There's restrictions in Sharia law are upon the Muslims, the majority of the restrictions, not upon non-Muslims. So celebrations are permitted for them. But now the question, the current subject, is what is the legal status of non-Islamic celebrations which are commemorated in other religious faiths for a Muslim? What is the legal status? The legal status is prohibition for a Muslim. A Muslim is not permitted, for instance, to commemorate Diwali. A Muslim is not permitted to commemorate Holi. A Muslim is not permitted to celebrate Hanukkah. A Muslim is not permitted to celebrate Christmas, all these various celebrations. This is the ruling for Muslims. They are prohibited. So this prohibition is what some people dispute, especially when it comes to Christmas. With the other religious celebrations, the books of jurisprudence are very clear, like Mahrajan and Nairuz. These are Persian festivals, Persian New Year and other types of festivals. The books of jurisprudence are very clear that these types of celebrations are not permitted. And they mention that even exchange of gifts, when they exchange gifts, Muslims should not exchange gifts when these celebrations occur. One of the main underlying reasons for this ruling is the identity of a Muslim, to preserve the religious identity of each faith. Why is this important? This is important that the message of Islam remain very clear. And additionally, there is no compulsion in religion. So some people misunderstand this by saying that there is tolerance by celebrating and commemorating the religious celebration of another faith. But in reality, this is a type of compulsion where people are compelled emotionally to celebrate the religious commemoration or celebration of another faith, when their own religious identity must be preserved. This is one of the underlying wisdoms in the Sharia. For instance, people ask, why are Muslim men permitted to marry women from the Ahlul Kitab, Jews and Christians, and the Muslim women are not permitted to marry men from the Ahlul Kitab? Ostensibly, this seems unfair to them. But if they understood that the reason behind this ruling is because the Muslim male is commanded by the Quran not to enforce his faith upon his spouse. The Muslim male is commanded by the Quran not to enforce his faith upon his spouse. So if he marries a Christian woman, he cannot enforce Islam upon the Christian woman. She's permitted to celebrate Christmas and to drink alcohol and follow the regulations of her faith as she wants. But this is not the case with other faiths, or it's not guaranteed for Muslim women when they marry men from other faiths. They can be forced conversions. So for this safety, the Muslim woman must demand, if she falls in love with a man, she must demand that he become Muslim. But understanding these types of rulings is something inherently important for Muslims today, to realize that the ruling of the prohibition of these commemorating these religious festivals is to preserve our own religious identity. And of course, the prohibition is from the Quran and Sunnah, as I will go through the fatwa, the verdict, shortly. But before doing so, I want to mention some of the emotional reasons and some of the reasons based upon base desire, where some Muslims fall into the simple dire warning from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he told us that لَتَتَّبِعُنَّ, that you shall surely follow the ways of whom? Those who came prior to you, الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. And they said, who are they? Are they the Jews and the Christians? And the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, yes, of course. And the famous narration that if one of them entered a lizard hole, the Muslims will enter the lizard hole, following the ways of the Jews and the Christians. Additionally, in one narration of the hadith, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that if one of them slept with his own mother openly in public, then someone from my nation will do the same. This was a warning to the nation of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam regarding the future state of the ummah, the nation. And this, of course, occurred recently when Bahrain and Emirat, UAE, recognized the illegal state of Israel. Some of the representatives of Bahrain and Emirat, when they went to the occupied land of Palestine, to Jerusalem, they stood on what the Jews refer to as the Wailing Wall. For us, it's Ha'itul Buraq, the wall of the Buraq, which is the wall, the western wall of the Al-Masjid al-Aqsa complex, occupied wall. And they have some renovations being made now. The occupiers are making some renovations. The Arab envoys, they stood on the wall and they participated in the Hanukkah celebrations. So this is following the ways of the Jews and the Christians. What is the legal status of people who commemorate other religious ceremonies? Meaning, the minimum is the hurma, the prohibition of such actions. That participating in the religious actions of other faiths is totally prohibited. So Muslims who join political parties like the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats, and they attend religious ceremonies, when they go, some of them participate in the religious ceremonies, but those who are aware of their faith will not participate. There are people who are a part of these political parties and they do not participate in the religious ceremonies. So it's impermissible for a Muslim to do such things. But wanting to follow the ways of the Jews and the Christians in everything, has made many Muslims lose the essence of their faith to the extent that even wanting to imitate drinking champagne, so we have non-alcoholic champagne, so or we have non-alcoholic beer, meaning because we are not permitted to drink beer, alcoholic beverage. And by the way, some people, they misquote the ruling of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala relating to nabidh. Nabidh was fermented drinks, for any fermented drink other than wine, which Imam Abu Hanifa permitted for medicinal reasons and for reasons like which I mentioned, at-taqawi, which is to strengthen oneself. You can check this in the Hanafi works. Imam Abu Hanifa, when he permitted this, he permitted a small amount for medicinal reasons and with conditions. So some people misquote this from Imam Abu Hanifa. And the fatwa, the verdict in the Hanafi school is that it is prohibited. So the fatwa is not given on the statement of Imam Abu Hanifa, yet you have some reformists attempting to say that Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah permitted nabidh. Yes, he permitted nabidh in small quantities with conditions. If you check, for instance, I'lam al-Anam of Shaykh Nuruddin Itr, he mentions at-taqawi, strengthening oneself, and other conditions. You also check Raddul Muhtar and other works of the Hanafi school, you will find this legal ruling. But this is how people misconstrue the legal rulings in any one of the four schools. So the internal conflict some Muslims face, this internal conflict of wanting to assimilate with non-Muslims, leads them to permit certain things which otherwise they would feel left out. Meaning, if they do not celebrate Christmas, if they do not drink wine, if they do not drink champagne, if they do not drink beer, if they do not participate in certain ways of non-Muslims, they would feel left out in society. This is a human condition that we face. Some of them would go as far as permitting the LGBT flag. So you have the LGBT flag, which would be haram at the minimum to display and to hold and wave. But now you have countries like Qatar, which have accepted the LGBT flag for the FIFA International Games I think in 2022. But likewise, you will have individuals who will adopt the LGBT flag. And the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam foretold this in a hadith, that in the end of times, people from his nation, they will be what? Nikahul rajuli ar-rajula. A man will conduct a wedding ceremony with a man. Meaning, certain people will permit this. Do not be shocked. There are people permitting all sorts of things today. Eventually, they will permit a man marrying a man and a woman to marry a woman. And regarding them, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave warnings that when that occurs, there will be the descent of ar-rihul hamra, the red wind that shall come down, that shall punish them. This sign has not occurred yet, but we may see this sign occurring in the coming years, maybe very quick, seeing that even a country like Qatar has accepted the LGBT flag. So this issue of commemorating and celebrating Christmas, is this something new and that the previous scholars were unfamiliar regarding it? The answer is no. They did give fatwa, they did give a verdict regarding it. For instance, Al-Imam Jalaluddin Abdul Rahman al-Suyuti rahimahullah ta'ala, a hadith scholar and a renowned jurist of the Shafi'i school, who passed away in the Islamic date of 911. He wrote a book, Al-Amru bil-Ittiba' wa-Nahyu anil ibtida', commanding people to follow the Quran and Sunnah and abandon ibtida', innovation. He, rahimahullah ta'ala, he gave a verdict on Christmas. And the verdict is here. I have the verdict with me. I will cite some of the passages of this verdict. Was the basis of the verdict regarding disbelief of those Muslims who commemorate Christmas? The answer is no. So recently someone has been forwarding a fatwa by a prominent da'iyah, caller to Islam, stating that when someone says Merry Christmas, it does not entail kufr, which is correct, because the Christmas is in reference to the birth of Jesus, Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam. And Merry just means a happy Christmas, meaning a joyous state with regard to the birth of Isa alayhi salam. And the fatwa stated that this does not allude to disbelief of those Muslims who state as such. That is correct. The fatwa is not a one of disbelief. The fatwa given by the likes of Imam Jalaluddin Suyuti rahimahullah ta'ala is regarding a prohibition of celebration of this festival, of bid'ah. Because bid'ah, according to the majority of the fuqaha jurists, has 5 legal rulings. The most severe of them being hurma, of haram. If it's kufr, it doesn't fall under bid'ah, it's kufr, meaning it's out of the fold of Islam. The person is out of the fold of Islam. But bid'ah is a severe ruling, meaning the ruling of bid'ah is ruling of haram. So he mentions the day of Christmas in his fatwa, where he says, وَمِمَّا يَفْعَلُهُ كَثِيرٌ مِنَ النَّاسِ فِي أَيَامِ الشِّتَاءِ, what many of these people do during the winter days. وَيَزْعُمُونَ أَنَّهُ مِيلَادُ عِيسَى عَلَيْهِ السَّلَامِ, they claim during the winter days this is the birth of Isa alayhi salam. Of course, this claim is incorrect because we know the origins of Christmas are pagan. It's a Nordic celebration. The Vikings and others would celebrate after the winter solstice on the 21st of December, the shortest daytime hours in the year, the opposite of the summer solstice, and then they would celebrate the elongating of the days on the 25th of December. This is well known, and it is well known also that Isa alayhi salam was not born on this day, and this shows the incorrect verdict of those scholars who state that this is the date of birth of Isa alayhi salam. This is incorrect. And if they say that when the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam entered al-Madinah al-Munawwarah, he observed that the Jews were fasting on the 10th of Muharram. And when he inquired, alayhi salam, why they were fasting, he was informed that they are celebrating or thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Exodus. So the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam said, "Nahnu awla bi Musa." We have more right to Musa alayhi salam. And the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam fasted on the 10th of Muharram, but added an additional day. So the Muslims would fast on the 9th and the 10th, or the 10th and the 11th. Why? To oppose them. This hadith, there are two things to note. Number one, the 10th of Muharram is the actual date of the Exodus, unlike the claim that Isa alayhi salam was born on the 25th of December, which is incorrect. So the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam affirmed that he confirmed the fact that Musa alayhi salam and the Bani Israel, the Exodus, the event occurred on the 10th of Muharram, the drowning of Fir'aun. But at the same time, he opposed the Jews in the method of fasting by adding the 9th of Muharram and the 11th of Muharram. So this shows that even if Christmas Day was the actual date of birth of Isa alayhi salam, which it is not, the Muslims, if they were joyous regarding the birth of Isa alayhi salam, they would do it totally different to the Christians. But the historical fact remains, it is not the date, and it is in fact a pagan festival. So he states, فَجَمِيعُ مَا يُصْنَعُ أَيْضًا فِي هَذِهِ اللَّيَالِ مِنَ الْمُنْكَرَاتِ. Additionally, many prohibited acts or abominable acts are carried out in this day. مثل إيقاد النيران وإحداث طعام, like they light candles. So he states this from the munkarat, from the bid'at, from innovation in religion. Bid'ah munkara, rejected. Bid'ah sayyi'ah. وشراء شمع وغير ذلك, and they buy candles and then they light these candles. فإن اتخاذ هذه المواليد موسما ودين النصارى, taking these dates of birth as a seasonal thing is the religion of the Christians. ودين النصارى. So Christmas, he states, is a Christian religious affair. ليس لذلك أصل في دين الإسلام. There is no basis for this in the religion of Islam. ولم يكن لهذا الميلاد ذكر في عهد السلف الماضين. That there is no mention of this in the time of the pious predecessors. بل أصله مأخوذ عن النصارى. The origins of this is taken from the Christians. وانضم إليه سبب طبيعي وهو كونه شتاء المناسب لإيقاد النيران. He states what is added onto this is the fact that it's winter time, and when it's winter time, naturally people like lighting fires. So it's when you see these pictures of Santa Claus and the snow, and then the fire is lit on the 24th of December and the 25th of December, this adds a natural inclination to such things. This is why people find a natural inclination to a Christmas tree, especially in the northern hemisphere, when we have shorter days and it gets dark and you see a Christmas tree, and the nature likes this, meaning the nature of a human, seeing fire in the darkness and in the cold, because a fire gives light and it gives warmth. So this is the natural inclination people have towards this. But he states that this is bid'ah, innovation. He mentions other things, and remember Easter eggs, for instance. Easter eggs symbolize the resurrection of Christ. So they claim that Jesus was crucified and then rose from the dead. We as Muslims believe he was raised without crucifixion. بَرْ رَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَيْهِ. He was raised, Isa alayhi salam, without crucifixion. So when they claim that Isa alayhi salam was resurrected from the dead, the egg symbolizes this. So what is the ruling on Easter? The answer is hurma, prohibition. So if people bought Easter eggs and started sharing Easter eggs, No one will say chocolate is haram. The verdict would sound ridiculous. The symbolism is haram. The symbolism of the egg symbolizes the resurrection of Christ. But no one is saying chocolate in itself is haram. Likewise, no one is saying candles in themselves are haram, or a Father Christmas hat in itself is haram. The symbolism it represents causes the hurma, the prohibition. The prohibition is based on the symbolism. Like a crucifix symbolizes towards the Christian faith, there is certain symbolism which is prohibited. Now, the proofs, he gives various of his istidlal, meaning legal inferences, the standard proofs like وَمَنْ تَشَبَّهَ بِقَوْمٍ فَهُوَ مِنْهُمْ. Whoever imitates the people, he is from amongst them. Now, the imitation here is in reference to that imitation. There are those things which would be khilaf awla, meaning it's better not to imitate, but there is no sin. But the imitation of prohibition are those things which relate to the religion of other faiths. This is why if Pakistan opens the Sikh temples and allows the Sikhs in and benefits from the Sikhs and allows the Sikh minority in India to have freedom of religion, which is fine, absolutely fine according to our faith, it does not mean that we as Muslims participate in their festivals. We give them the freedom to build their temples in Sikh areas with the legal parameters set out in the books of jurisprudence, but we ourselves do not participate in their festivals. We allow all the minorities to carry out their festivals, but we do not participate in their festivals. And likewise, they do not participate in our festivals. We do not coerce through emotional blackmail minorities to participate in Ramadan or Eid. No, they carry out their own religious festivals. We carry out our own religious festival. This is why Islam is more realistic than secularism. Secularism is based on a fakery, a deception that the groups from various faiths will pretend to venerate and respect one another, but it's in reality they do not believe in the faith of one another. So it's a pretense, an act. But Islam is realistic. It allows people to carry out their convictions. A Sikh, a Hindu, a Buddhist, a Christian, a Jew are all permitted to carry out their religious convictions as firmly as they want. They worship what they want, they do what they want, and for the majority of things, they follow the law that they believe in. The state does not interfere. And the Muslim carries out his convictions. But when it comes to worldly things, they deal with one another. They have good dealings, which is ta'ayush, living amongst one, as communities. This is reality. This is how Muslim societies were formulated. But secularism enforces a fake assimilation of the faiths, where a Sikh will not believe in the Muslim faith and a Muslim will not believe in their Sikh faith. But the fake respect that they may represent is not really from the heart. But Islam is more realistic with this regard. So the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited Muslims from taking up the religious signs of other faiths. Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum. Whoever imitates a people, he is from amongst them. And what he mentions, laysa minna man tashabbaha bighayrina. This is a hadith also narrated by Imam Tirmidhi. Laysa minna man tashabbaha bighayrina. He is not from us, the one who imitates other than us. لا تشبهوا باليهود ولا بالنصارى. Do not imitate the Jews and the Christians. In what things? In religious aspect. For instance, the barneta, if someone wore the hat of the Jews, this is a religious symbol for them. Or the locks of the Jews, these are religious symbols for them. We are prohibited to imitate them in that regard. Likewise, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also said, وَخَالِفُ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, that oppose the disbelievers, the polytheists, meaning in those religious symbolism. In their religious symbolism, or that which is peculiar to their communities, do not imitate them in that regard. Leave that to them. They have their own identity and Muslims have their own unique identity. This is the essence of Islam.